And I live my life by three major words: flexibility. Well, now I may add a fourth: durability. And improvisation. And it's just a joy to be here today. Now, I normally would wear a sport jacket, but I'm hot up here, so I'll leave it off if you don't mind. It's really a blessing, as Batya said, for us to be here. Hopefully it won't be the last time up in Wales. There's much work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done, in fact. So I want to thank also especially Pastors Robbie and Donna and Pastor Daniel and all those that, you know, have opened this church, this house of the Lord, to stand together with us, not only at Vision for Israel, but to make a statement in the heavenlies to the powers that be, that God has planted an anchor of hope and of solidarity in His Word. So we're very grateful. As I said earlier, Batya and I have 3 children and 7 grandchildren, one who passed on to glory on February 17, 2025. It was a very powerful moment, as difficult and challenging as it was. There was something within God's special place for the born and the unborn that became so precious to us. For just a little bit of background, for those of you who don't know me that well, and this is without giving my testimony, but I was born in the United States of America in a city that we nicknamed called Motown because it was the home of soul music. I grew up in part of that era there. And at a young age, my father, who loved jazz music and classical music, would take my older brother and I have 3 brothers, but my older brother and I at that time, I was maybe about 6 years old. He would actually take us to one of the jazz nightclubs to, just be exposed to music. We all loved music. My father couldn't sing in key anyways, but he liked to hear music. And in the synagogue, the shofar, the ram's horn, is blown during the high holidays, which is the fall feast of Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, or the Festival of the Harvest. And so I always admired the shofar player and how long he could resonate, hold those notes out in the synagogue. I just was fascinated by it. So I thought, well, what instrument is closest to that? And I thought, well, playing the trumpet. So I thought, okay, one day I'll play the trumpet. And so my father took us to a jazz club, and this will kind of date me or us, but I heard this tremendous trumpeter play, and at the break, it was a nightclub which still exists in Detroit. There was probably not more than 75 people there. My father invited this trumpeter over, and he was a big, tall, black gentleman, had a big belly, big cheeks, and but blew that trumpet like nobody I've ever seen. But every time he would blow it, his cheeks would blow out too, like a hippopotamus. And my father said, well, I want to introduce you to my son. And this was Dizzy Gillespie, if any of you know the name. And I was a small little kid, so when I looked at Dizzy and how big and overweight he was and how big his cheeks were, he said, young man, I understand you want to play the trumpet. And I looked at him and I said, mm-mm. So I changed my instrument love to guitar. But have always loved music and continue to do so. And after coming to the Lord, eventually became a worship leader in the States, actually together with a few Bible teachers down in South Florida after I graduated high school. and that brought me closer to a relationship with somebody I had met when I had just left a rock band. I had just come to the Lord, and my hair was down past my shoulders, and I was prayed for by a Bible teacher who's my spiritual mentor, as well as he was my pastor for many years, Derek Prince. And because of that relationship, many things would happen. 1 year after I was a believer, I was traveling. I said, I'll work the book table for you, whatever, carry your luggage. It'll just be a privilege. So we came to a church in Central Florida. He says, I'm going to give you 10 minutes, 15 minutes max to give your testimony. And I said, what's a testimony? I had no idea what this Christianese language was like. And but that was the beginning of a long-term relationship from 1972 until he went home to be with the Lord in 2004, maybe somewhere around there. So that's also how I ended up in Israel at the same time as he did. And so it was a real privilege. I also served in the IDF. I was an Israeli soldier in the military between full-time but mostly the reserves for 13 years during the Intifada 1 and Intifada 2. And many people don't realize this, but in the Israeli military, you're always, I cannot get over this, the fake news and the misinformation that goes out. 25% of my army unit was made up of Bedouin Arab Muslims. And they protected my life, and I protected their life. We fought side by side together on the borders of Israel. So when people accuse Israel of being an apartheid state, I really have to, I mean, it's sad, but I have to laugh too. When Batya was in hospital, she was actually mostly in Hadassah Hospital during her 3 different bouts with cancer. 50 to 60% of the patients there are Arabs and Jews. Almost, let's just say, to make it easy, 50-50. In rooms together, nurses, doctors, receptionists, clerks, all working side by side. Jews and Arabs, Jews saving Arabs, Arabs saving Jews, Jews speaking Arabic, Arabs speaking Hebrew. That's apartheid? I don't think so. And just recently we were there when Batya was in the emergency. Who was the lady in the next, beyond the next curtain? Was an elderly Muslim lady. This is Israel. This is the reality, not the portrait that people are saying otherwise. And so during my experience there, I also evolved into journalism as I had a passion for it all the way back to school. And everything I'm about to share with you on a weekly basis, I share on a weekly basis. And I'm sharing and revealing what's happening on the positive side of Israel and also the various war fronts when you go to our YouTube channel, Vision for Israel. But it's not just that. It's also that it's been being broadcast on about 7 different channels, and I understand late night on Sunday night it's also on Revelation TV. So I wonder, Gabi, if you can put up the handsome-looking picture of me with this dark picture of the city of Jerusalem behind, and let's watch it for just a few minutes, and then we'll close it off. Welcome back once again to VFI News. The big news, though, in Israel this week is not in Israel, it's in Iran. The Ayatollahs are warning that they are working around the clock to be able to launch 2,000 ballistic missiles at Israel a day in a future war, and also warning that they're running out of water in Tehran. Meanwhile, Hezbollah in Lebanon is rearming at a furious pace in an effort to get ready for this future war that Iran seems to think is coming. And more remains of slain hostages have been returned to Israel by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Well, friends, we had another amazing week in Israel with the return of the remains of a soldier, Hadar Golden. So that's good, thank you. So it doesn't look in sync, but it is online, and that's just because of the delay here. But that gives a taste, and there's short version videos. When you go to Vision for Israel at YouTube, you can hit the full-length videos or the shorter ones if you have less time. But we try to give an update on what's happening every single week. And we also do it via email, which has even more and other subjects. So if you haven't signed up or we don't have your email address, it's a free subscription. You can sign up at the resource table in the back and give your name and email address very, very clearly, and we'll make sure you get on and receive it. And the most important thing of doing this is to really raise up an army of intercessors. It's so important in this day and age. You know, I'll never forget the words of Derek Prince when we spoke about end-time revival and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit and massive evangelistic campaigns. We both agreed on one thing, that as we get closer to the end of the age and the coming of the Lord, the deception will be so great, and I believe Israel is really the threshing floor for much of what we're seeing happening, even in evangelical circles, but that it'll be more like Gideon's army in the end of time. Remember the parable in the beginning of Matthew 25? It talks about the 10 virgins. 5 made it in and 5 didn't. But as I understand the scripture, they were all believing in the coming of the Lord. So only 50% is not very positive. And that's why we need to have the pachad, the fear of the Lord, in this important hour. So everything that I'm sharing with you are things that I try to share online, and I'm not going to hold back today one bit. But I also want to say, for anybody that's watching online or will watch later on or is here today, I don't hate the Arabs. I have many Arab Christian friends. I have many Arab Muslim friends, in fact. Batya and I just recently received an invitation down to the largest Bedouin Arab city for a big celebration. We're not in the country at the moment, so we couldn't go. But he was just so touched when he was trying to figure out, we were placing more bomb shelters. He owns a crane company. And he was trying to understand how I, as a Jew, believe in Jesus. So we're working that through. Because to many people, Muslims, Jews, Christians, you're either a Jew, you're a Christian, a Muslim, or you don't believe in anything at all. So when you combine it, it gets a little bit more of an interesting subject. Well, and I also have to say that probably through Vision for Israel, we've done more for Arab Israelis than all these people running in the streets demonstrating against Israel. There was somebody, she's a British on TV broadcast journalist. She was interviewing people that were holding flags in London. I don't know if you saw it. I can't remember her name offhand. But she asked somebody carrying an ISIS flag, do you know what this flag is? And he goes, yeah, it's the flag of Saudi Arabia, which wasn't even close. It was actually the ISIS flag. This is what they're running around in the streets of London and other streets throughout the United Kingdom. Young people holding flags or shouting out things, they have no idea what they're talking about. When they say, from this river to the sea, Palestine will be free, it's basically, as Pastor West said, it's for the total destruction of Israel. That's exactly what it means. So when the mayor of London denies that and says, well, you have to put it in a context, that is the context. That is the only context. And next week, I hope, on YouTube, next week or the week after the latest, we're putting a special half-hour program comparing the constitutional principles of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is so named the Palestinian Authority, Hezbollah, and Hamas. And you'll see there's no difference between all three. They're all sworn to the destruction of Israel and Western civilization culturally as we understand it. So that's the war we're facing. Now, as we heard earlier, Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 to 2 says, "Comfort, yes, comfort my people, says your God. Speak comfort to Jerusalem, and cry out to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, for she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." When Batya spoke about our grandson, Micha, who said that he had this vision and went to heaven and saw Noga, his cousin who had passed away in February, he also went on to start asking about rockets. What would happen if the rocket fell on our house? Or what would happen if the rocket fell on the food store down the block where they live in the countryside? And as I'm driving and I'm hearing this and also the vision about heaven, I'm thinking, imagine this, everybody. If you're a parent, you're a grandparent, this is what Israeli children are asking. You tell me what country on the face of this earth a whole generation of children are growing up running to bomb shelters, being taken in their mother's or father's arms, some killed, some injured, mostly not. But imagine a whole generation. We had a volunteer at Vision for Israel who between high school and university came and volunteered for us, and she lives in the city of Ashkelon, which is the furthest major city in Israel closest to the Gaza Strip. And I asked her, I said, "How long have you lived there?" She said, "My whole life." I said, "How has life been?" This is only an hour and a half, by the way, drive from where we live. She said, "My whole life, from my earliest childhood, all I remember is growing up and running to bomb shelters." Imagine if you live here in Wales and that's how you're raising a generation of children. But that's the reality in Israel today. And as I said, over 60,000 rockets since the year 2000 have been launched against Israel, whether by Hezbollah, by Iran, by Yemen, by Iraq, by Hamas, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Over 19,000 of these were just launched from the Gaza Strip since the Swords of Iron War broke out on October 7th, 2023. Now, where were we that day? Well, I heard Batya get up early as she normally does. I'm a night person. She's an early morning person. How many of you out there are night people? Yeah. And how many morning people? Oh, it's about split. Well, we usually meet somewhere in between the two. But she woke up listening to the news. It was Simchat Torah, the last day of Sukkot, that we celebrate the rejoicing over the law of Moses. So people are home. It's like a Shabbat. I think it was actually a Saturday, no? And all of a sudden, we could tell by the reports that things are not going well in the south. There's been an attack. They didn't tell the whole truth in the news, maybe because they didn't know all of it at that point. But as the hours went on, the crisis and the reports were unfolding. We're going from bad to worse, to disaster, to catastrophe. At about 10:15 a.m., I was in the shower, shampooing my hair, and all of a sudden the air raid sirens, rocket sirens, are sounding in our neighborhood, which is like a suburban community outside of Jerusalem. And our younger daughter and Batya are shouting, "Get to the bomb shelter, get to the bomb shelter." We were in a rented apartment at the time, and I shouted back, "I have shampoo in my hair, I'm not getting out." Probably wasn't more than 20 seconds later, boom, the whole ground shook, the windows rattled, and an Iranian rocket shot by Hamas landed 500 feet from our doorstep. And then I decided the shampoo is not so important. My life is more important than that. But that's how close and how deadly these things are. Well, about half hour later, my daughter, a videographer, and I ran out. We saw the mayor there, who we know, and police were blocking off the area, but we just walked basically and saw the fins and half the rocket sticking out of the asphalt. It was 40 feet from a children's park. Fortunately, that morning, nobody was killed. So far, on October 7th, 2023, 251 hostages were taken by Hamas and Islamic Jihad into Gaza. This included men, women, children, foreign nationals, Negev Bedouin Muslims who are Israeli citizens, and some others with multiple citizenships. 83 of the hostages were killed by Hamas psychopaths. The statistics, at least as I know them or estimate now, 0 living hostages remain in Gaza. This we know for sure. I believe only 2 bodies of hostages are still being held in Gaza, and one of the recent ones happened to be a Tanzanian agricultural student who was studying in Israel and killed on October 7th. 168 living hostages have been rescued. And just the other day, Hamas announced the other morning that it transferred the body of Lieutenant Hadar Golden, who was killed in action in 2014 and held by Hamas since then. Tell me, what kind of an idiot, to use a nice word, needs to hold on to a dead body for 11 years to torture psychologically the family and to hold it as blackmail over Israel? Because Hamas and the jihadists understand that Israelis and Jews will do anything to get their living back and their dead back. And there's never closure until they're all home. And yet that's what we've been facing. Since October 7th, roughly 1,950 Israelis have been killed. 1,152 security personnel have been killed since October 7th. This includes IDF soldiers, the Israeli police, Shin Bet, which is like our FBI, and other security forces. On that day, 5,431 were wounded. And over 100,000 Israelis, both Jews and Arabs, suffer from PTSD symptoms, post-traumatic syndrome disorder. Now, in exchange for these living hostages and the dead hostages, Israel released 2,058 terrorists in Israeli prisons. And the statistics we know, 80% of terrorists return to acts of terror. So if we think whether or not this ceasefire is leading to a permanent peace, I doubt it. Through historical past experience, it's very highly unlikely, even with the threats of the United States government and military. 1,200 Israelis were massacred on October 7, 2023. As I said, Jews and Arabs, foreign students and workers. If they could proportionally estimate how many this would have been, like in 9/11 in the United States, it would be as if 35 to 40,000 Americans were killed in one day. Just try and grasp that. I don't know what the population of Wales is. Anybody? 3 million. Israel's population is 10 million, Jewish and Arab and Druze. So just figure proportionally what that would be. It was more Jewish people massacred and murdered any time since the Holocaust in the concentration camps. Another soldier who was fallen named Captain Omer Nutra. He was a lone soldier from New York. His body was returned after more than 2 years in Hamas captivity. Our President Herzog, somebody I respect very highly and we know, said these words, "Though most of us never met you personally, we all feel you were part of our lives because you chose us when you came to Israel alone, when you enlisted and when you fought. You became a symbol of courage and light to an entire nation." I could relate to that so strong because that's how I was when I came to Israel as a lone soldier. The President went on to say, "You fought with unimaginable bravery, facing a ruthless, merciless enemy. You knew the danger, yet you did everything to strike evil, to protect life, to ensure that the light would not be extinguished." Now, if you could get ready this next video that I pointed out, and hopefully the voice will sync up. But I just want you to know that very day our son went to battle also in the Gaza Strip against terrorists. Batya mentioned over 3,000 terrorists crossed over through about 32 different settlements across several points from out of the Gaza Strip. And many of the people in the south were part of the Israeli political Labor Party, which was, I would call it central left, left wing. They were people that had bent over backwards to give work permits to help the Arabs of the Gaza Strip have a financial means to have a good lifestyle. But these very workers became the spies of Hamas. So sad. That's how Hamas knew where certain young ladies were. That's how they knew where the armaments were held by the residential security forces, that they knew exactly where to go first and where they could find the homes of actually the heads of security. And they were the first people to be murdered. One of whom is a friend of ours who's head of security for a big part of that portion. He's South African, by the way, and came on Aliyah to Israel like I did. And he headed up security for one of the areas in the Negev. And he was between Hamas in vehicles this way and this way. The only thing that saved him was he was in a bulletproof vehicle and was able to race through. And the gunfire that riddled the vehicle he had didn't hit him. Let's watch this video and turn the lights, please. The sign at the end was actually the sign that was on the bomb shelter that we placed at that kibbutz had been blown off in the grenade attacks. And that was real footage that my daughter and I shot 1 month after the attack. They had cleared the dead bodies, but the blood was still all over. And it's very hard to grasp. And maybe those that are always pointing the finger at Israel will understand this was a war for our survival. And they only understand that we are only strong when we defend ourselves. Now the living hostages are home, but more and more stories are coming to the front and to the United Nations, various bodies and councils that ignored Israel's hostages are now coming out about the sexual torture and the brutality of Hamas, even things that we never really saw in Nazi Germany to that extent, even though over 6 million Jews were killed. And by the way, just last week, there was a film that came out that Batya and I saw called Nuremberg, which if you have the chance and it comes here, I recommend you go see it. It's based on the true story. But terrorists today leave prison, Hamas terrorists. Some have been released to other countries. They're leaving as millionaires. They're pro-Hamas propagandists romanticize terrorist prisoners as they were innocent hostages themselves who lied about their injuries and treatment they received in prison. And trust me, I've been in a terrorist prison, one stint I had to do in the army, and I've never seen prisoners treated so well. Since this ceasefire, Hamas continues to consolidate power, executing hundreds of its own civilians and rivals from various Arab clans, wealthy families within the Gaza Strip, who would like to see Hamas overthrown, but they themselves are being murdered. So, on October 13th, the last day of Sukkot this year, 1 year after this, 2 years after this tragedy, U.S. President Donald Trump in Israel addressed the Israeli Knesset, our parliament, about the ceasefire that was agreed upon by Hamas. A 20-point plan where they shall live happily ever after. My friends, I'm not disrespectful to a president who has done more for Israel than any president, certainly since President Harry Truman of the United States, when he recognized Israel as a sovereign modern state once again, resurrected from the dead in history. Trump has done many great things, despite what the BBC says, despite what CNN, Communist News Network, says, despite all these news channels. And as I said, I watch Sky News Australia if I want to watch any of them. But the reality is this. Moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was a great thing. Recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights was a great move. Helping Israel to defend itself, a wonderful move. He did more and above and beyond, and many Christians serving in his cabinet, the head of the U.S. State Department, and the American ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, a solid, born-again Christian with a tremendous testimony, which I've heard personally myself. There are lots of good people there. But there's also the enemy at work to deceive. And I personally believe that this ceasefire is just temporary. I have to be honest with you. When you release over 2,000 prisoners, and maybe we'll be releasing another 1,000, who knows? There's tremendous pressure on Israel now to release 200 more Hamas who were stuck in the yellow zone, which was where Israel, through this ceasefire, is allowed to have security control. But Trump was pleading with Israel to release them. I think they're going to be released to other countries. Who knows which terrorists will show up in Wales, in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Ireland, all throughout Europe. They just discovered one of the actual brutal Hamas murderers on October 7th was discovered in Louisiana in the south of the United States. They just discovered about 2 weeks ago, a week or two ago, it was revealed somebody posing as an Arab journalist in Belgium was also a Hamas terrorist fighter on October 7th. And the authorities were alerted. Well, anyways, Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 14 says, "They have healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace." So the real question, and I don't have the answer for you, but the real question, is this ceasefire nothing more than a superficial healing? Is this nothing more than false assurance? We have to be discerning, prepared, and aware of what will happen in God's prophetic time map. Because it does say that even if the elect could be deceived, that's what will happen in the end of times. So it's important we listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit and we stay in touch with each other. Now let me give you a rundown in Israel's war fronts. As I mentioned, Hamas's vengeance and reign of terror and fear has been murdering its own civilian population and anyone getting in its way of governing. They do not want to give up power. By the way, I don't know if you know this statistically, but more Muslims are killed by Muslim terrorists than non-Muslims. And I'm saying that despite the fact that it's a very sad day that since 2007, over 120,000 Nigerian Christians have been brutally massacred by Islamists, by jihadists in Nigeria. There's only one president I've ever heard of that was willing or is willing to go in with troops, Donald Trump. Well, the news makes a mockery of him, but here's the only president I hear actually saying something about the massacre of Nigerian Christians. And I'm not standing here waving a political flag. God's neither a Republican or a Democrat, nor a Tory, nor whatever else you have going on here, nor Israel's Likud party or Labor Party. God is God. He is sovereign. But still, he raises up kings and he deposes others. And we need to pray for our brothers and sisters in Nigeria. Egypt is trying to mediate. Hezbollah. Forgot about them in Lebanon. Hezbollah has been smuggling weapons from and via Syria once again. They are rebuilding in southern Lebanon. Egypt is trying to mediate to avoid escalation in another war, but they won't succeed. Hezbollah is Hezbollah. And unfortunately, the Lebanese army is too weak to disarm them. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warned Hezbollah is playing with fire, and the president of Lebanon is dragging its feet. The U.S. ambassador to Turkey, Thomas Barak, calls Lebanon a failed state. Speaking at a conference in Bahrain, which is one of the greatest friends Israel has amongst the Arab Gulf states. They're a member of the Abrahamic Accords and friendly towards Israel. Barak said that the terror group Hezbollah has still 40,000 terrorists and 15 to 20,000 rockets and missiles in their arsenal. For their sake, they better not have any beepers or walkie-talkies. That is the most amazing feat. And I heard that I think Hezbollah is trying to launch lawsuits for damages. Well, who told them to buy these beepers? And I'm not even sure all the facts we know are the real facts. That's what I love about Israel. Well, Barak said that Lebanon is a failed state. It has no central bank. Its banking system has collapsed. There are electricity shortages. People depend on private generators. And water and education is provided mostly by private suppliers. Hamas. Support for Hamas has not diminished, but it's growing amongst Palestinian Arabs. 80% of Palestinians want to get rid of Mahmoud Abbas, who somebody just hailed. Oh, yes, it's Macron of France. You know, that Frenchman, that little guy, whose wife slaps him occasionally in the face. Last week, or this week, Macron hailed Mahmoud Abbas, who's hated by his own people, 80% of his own people, as the Prince of Peace. Did you see that? It was in the news. I couldn't believe it. This is the best that Macron can come up with as for the Prince of Peace? Somebody has not read the Bible. %80 of the Palestinians want to get rid of Mahmoud Abbas as head of the PLO or the PA. 77% of those polled by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, not done by Jews, not done by Israelis, they believe that the PA should not be given the future to govern the Gaza Strip, but only Hamas. Can you believe it? After all the destruction they've brought down upon themselves, even rockets that they shot that misfired and fell back on their own hospital, even though Israel was blamed for it, but later we proved otherwise, and it was confirmed internationally. 6 consecutive polls have shown the very same. The Palestinian Arab population still wants Hamas, even while they're shooting and massacring their own and looting humanitarian aid. What about all the humanitarian aid that was backed up, thousands of truckloads, that was not being distributed because it would be the wrong narrative for Israel and show them in a good light? And Hamas would hijack it and sell it back to its own population to fund its own war. So isn't it sad when our populations, wherever they are, fall into such great deception? And what's frightening is the next generation is the most gullible and most vulnerable. It is estimated that 16,000 to 18,000 fighters are still left in Hamas. Iran. Among the mullahs of Iran and the Ayatollah Khamenei, their entire business is nothing less but to destroy Israel and the United States, who they call the Great Satan. Iran is rebuilding its ballistic missile arsenal and continues its drive for nuclear weapons, missiles they are developing, which they can hit Europe and the United States. Can you imagine? Their economy is in shambles. The people have been crushed. They have killed at least 1,000 of their own citizens as collaborators with Israel and the U.S. since the 12-day war in June. Their rivers and water sources are drying up, and yet even in the midst of judgment, thank God, there are hundreds of thousands of Iranians coming to know the Lord. But can you believe the president, Pezeshkian, I think is his name, of Iran, said that if Iran does not have major rainfall, by December, they will need to evacuate Tehran. Millions of people, because there's no water. You would think somebody would wake up on the right side of the bed and understand what's written in Scripture. Genesis 12, verse 3, I will bless those who bless thee and curse those who curse thee. Does Wales want to see blessing? Well, we need to be right on the side of God. And you know, I don't think it takes more than 10 in a city or a town or a village to stand up for the righteous representation and acts of God. But if God's people, and more specifically, evangelical Christians, whether charismatic, not charismatic, whether Baptist, Pentecostal, I just tell people I'm a Baptist, Pentecostal, Messianic Jew. I just make it easy to cover all the bases. I just can't understand the thinking of these people. We will spend, the Ayatollah will spend billions of oil income, which now is being also embargoed, to develop rockets, missiles, and nuclear weapons, but they can't even find a way to provide water for their own population. And Israel, Netanyahu, has personally said, we will help Iran develop water sources. Well, Iran's looking for another fight because their honor has been hurt. And so they're warning Israel and threatening us with more war. The lessons of God's physics are totally intact and it will not change. Now it says 10:24 in my computer here, so I guess I have to 3? So, well, anyhow. You know, 2 sayings when I was a young lad. After meeting Derek Prince, one morning at breakfast, he looked at me and he said, Be faithful in little, and you'll be found faithful in much. Be faithful in another man's ministry, and you'll be found faithful in your own. And when Batya and I were married, that was basically one of the major launching points, not the only one. So I thought to myself, after pastoring for 8 years in Israel and 4 in the States, and we launched the work of Vision for Israel, recently I was looking at one AI interpretation online, said the diameter of the universe is 93 billion light years, but that the universe could be finite because this is only what they have been able to measure. This is only what they could measure. I'm surprised they could measure that much. So I'm thinking in ministry and business and healing and deliverance, why are we limiting the Lord? The other day when we were in Washington, D.C., we have very good friends there that live right in D.C. for decades. They were in the restaurant and hotel business. Right around the corner from them lives Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook. I mean, it's one of his many homes. And he was telling me, they were telling us stories of like the wealth is beyond imagination. Just the interest off the billions they have, they can't spend fast enough. That actually one of these extreme, not him per se, but another wealthy businessman who you would know his name if I say it, he actually, when he comes to Washington to mix with and meet with the politicians, has all his furniture from California shipped to Washington, D.C. for the 2 weeks he's there. And then when he leaves, it's shipped back to California. And I'm thinking, the money that is wasted. I thought, why doesn't he just go buy new furniture each time? He wants his own furniture there. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is not fair. I think it's time we reclaim those billions for God's kingdom. I think it's time. Isaiah 54, verse 2 and 3, I didn't give you this verse, but this was a promise that the Lord gave to us. Isaiah 54, I think it's 2 and 3. It talks about extending the place of your tent. Oh, there we go. Everybody, let's read this. Enlarge the place of your tent, and let them stretch out the curtains of your dwellings. Do not spare. Lengthen your cords, for you shall, and strengthen your stakes, for you shall expand to the right and to the left, and your descendants will inherit the nations and make the desolate cities inhabited. So when we were launching further with our Millennium Center vision, dream, whatever, we had to raise $13.2 million to be debt-free and to build this big ministry complex. And along the way, this was one of the first early verses when we had a congregation. Sorry, I'm skipping a little bit back and forth, but it's like I'm getting a download from up there somewhere. Slight interference, the Wi-Fi of my head. During the Gulf War with Iraq and Saddam Hussein, a little old lady came in who asked for prayer from Batya and I at our congregation in Jerusalem at the end of the meeting. And her name was Miss Minnie, something like that. And we laid hands on her, and she started to kind of gyrate like a rocket. And I was concerned because we didn't know where she came from. And she said she had heart problems. And I thought, God, don't let her die here tonight. And then she started to prophesy over us. And it was this exact scriptures from Isaiah 54, verses 2 and 3. So at the time, I thought, okay, that's right on, because we're going to break a wall in the congregation so we can expand. So instead of 80 people meeting, we can have 100 people meeting. That was where my faith was in 1991, 91, 92. No, it was a word for the future. And now we're not in what was maybe 800 square feet. We're now in 80,000 square feet with parking. It's the cleanest parking lot you'll ever see. I get so upset if the parking lot is dirty. I like clean parking lots. And this is amazing because along the way, there'd be a few people, remember Betty, she'd come over and volunteer and she said, when you enter this complex, you will owe no man, no bank, any money at all. And after 4 years of building and raising funds and building and kind of like getting gray hair in the process, we entered that building. We didn't owe anybody anything. So now, I'm really believing. After I heard this about Mark Zuckerberg, I got really angry in the spirit. I said, that's it, I'm going to write him a letter. I'm going to write as many of these billionaires as I can and hope the letter gets to them. And I'm just going to say, you want to be blessed? Bless Israel. And if there's anything left over, trust me, I'll be blessing this church. But first, pray for me to get this right. Well, to the glory of God, and really, I'm saying this is God's doing. We're just simply stewards. And as Pastors Wes and Adriana know, so far we've donated, in addition to all the 473 bomb shelters, I think I said, and counting, and the over 300,000 school packs to children with new school supplies, both to Jewish and Arab children in need through the years. We've donated 16 ambulances, 1 blood mobile, 3 motorcycles, 2 fire and rescue ATVs for Judea and Samaria, 2 more ambulances on order right now, and a police security vehicle brand new for the city of Sderot, which lost over 50 of its people, as well as security people down the southernmost town next to the Gaza Strip. God is not unable, He is more than able. And our byline has always been in our ministry, when a crisis comes, it's too late to prepare. Look, last night, I find it interesting that there was a storm raging here because that was the theme of this conference. I think next time we'll call it The Sun is Rising. It's interesting. I won't go there. But I think that's a good title, actually. The time is now. Where do you want to know where I think we are prophetically? One more thing to look at, and then I'll close with the final scripture. Read Jeremiah 16, verses 15 to 16. It says, the Lord lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north and from all the lands. How many lands? Where he had driven them. For I will bring them back into their land, which I gave to their fathers. Behold, I will send for many fishermen, says the Lord, and they shall fish them. And afterward, I will send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and every hill and out of the holes of the rocks. We don't have time today to look at all the hundreds and thousands of anti-Semitic attacks and murders against Jews going on in the world. But consider what just happened in New York City's mayoral elections. 46% of Israelis now say they will avoid traveling to New York City now that incoming Mayor Mamdani will become the new mayor. They will be watching not just to try and arrest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but also other soldiers from the past, present, and future in the IDF. One day afterwards, New York City Fire Commissioner Robert Tucker, who's Jewish, submitted his resignation. The Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations said these words, that it marks a grim milestone. The city with the largest Jewish population will now be led by a man whose record and rhetoric reflect hostility towards Israel and the Jewish people. I think you have a mayor not too far off like that in London. They added, quote, Zoran Mamdani's elevation to Gracie Mansion, that's where the mayor officially lives, reminds us that anti-Semitism remains a clear and present danger, even in places where American Jews have long felt most secure. There can be no compromise with an ideology that demonizes or ostracizes Jews and Israelis. And don't forget that Mamdani pushed forward the saying, globalize the intifada. And I know what he means because I served in the Israeli military during Intifada 1 and 2. I believe what we are in the process of witnessing, despite the fact that nations and governments and political leaders and other bodies are trying to fight against anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is demonic. It's not just a theological difference that was propagated by people like Calvin, or I think you said Calvin, right? And Martin Luther, the notorious one. But it's been throughout history. But I believe the demons are being unleashed. And it's to drive the Jewish people home back to the land of Israel. Our former prime minister who signed the Oslo Peace Accords, which I was always against because I knew it would be a false peace, Yitzhak Rabin, who was later assassinated, he was a high-ranking Freemason. And he signed those accords, and he stood up on the Golan Heights only days before he was assassinated and held up the Bible and said, we don't need this ancient book to dictate to us the borders of Israel. He brought a curse. I'm not saying that that's the outcome in every case, but that was a severe warning if you ask me. But he's the same prime minister that said, if we only had another 1 million Jews that would immigrate to Israel, we would never have to give away Judea and Samaria. And today there are about 600,000 Jews that are called settlers who live in those areas. Believe you me, I can never see that they will ever leave. And anti-Semitism will grow. And now, of all places, of all the places in the world, the Jewish capital outside of Israel is New York City. And now a mayor is coming to office. And there are already Jewish people packing up their bags to leave for Florida, for maybe the Carolinas, for Israel. And I believe I'm hearing the same voices in Manchester and London as well. Jewish people who were recently at a home and an apartment fair in London, young people said, there's no more home or place for us left in London. It's becoming frightening. And I understand what they're saying. You see, I came in response to fishermen, but now the hunters are on the prowl. Well, the future is this, and I believe this could be leading us. Are we praying now or later? Okay, perfect. Isaiah chapter 62, verse 6 and 7 says, I have set watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem. They shall never hold their peace day or night. You who make mention of the Lord, that's you, me, who make mention of the Lord, do not keep silent. In Hebrew, the word is like a secretary. You who laskir, you who are supposed to remind the Lord of his appointments. Do not keep silent and give him no rest until he establishes and makes Jerusalem a praise in all the earth. The Berean Bible says, and makes her the praise of the earth. I believe that's God's intended plan. God is going to complete and fulfill his word no matter what we say, no matter what we do, no matter what little Macron says, no matter what President Trump says, no matter what our own prime minister says, or the Starmer, it doesn't matter. God is on the throne today. And this is why it's important to be his intercessors, Alistair. So that's exactly what we're going to do now.